Okay, today we're going to be making a pen and we're going to be using this modern Western Myall. This tree grows in arid Western Australia and Central Australia, and it's a figured Western Myall. It has some interesting swirl patterns within the grains, which hopefully we'll be able to see once the pen is finally made. To get started, we need to break up this piece of wood, and it's an incredibly hard piece of wood, so we need to slowly get it through the bandsaw and cut it down to the appropriate size. So I'm assessing this piece of wood for the straightness of the cut as well as the grain patterns. I'm going to need to continue to cut it at the appropriate sizes so we can end up with the appropriate blanks that we need to be able to start the project. This is closer to what we're after. It's got a blemish in there, it's a natural material, so we can cut around that. First step is to take these brass tubes and use them as a reference to measure the size of wood we're going to be cutting. Once that's done, we'll run it through the bandsaw. Each pen requires two blanks, so we'll be securing each of the blanks into the chuck of the lathe and getting it up to around about 1100 RPM and drilling the appropriate size holes to be able to accommodate those brass tubes. Once that's done, we'll just check to make sure that the brass tubes fit in snugly, and they do. Before gluing the brass tubes into the wood, we need to rough them up a bit with some 80 grit sandpaper so the glue has something to bind onto on the brass. Once that's done, we're going to use some quickset glue and apply it to the brass tubes, and then just slide them in and out of the wood just to ensure that the glue makes full contact along the full length of the brass. It makes good contact between the brass and the wood. Then we can wipe off any excess glue. Whenever gluing the brass tubes into the wood, it's always a good idea just to have the wood just a fraction longer than the brass tubes, so we're going to need to trim that down to get them to the right size. This is the tool we'll be using. Whenever trimming, always keep an eye on the shavings. As soon as you see any signs of brass, you know you've gone far enough. And this is what you end up with. You can tell you've gone far enough by the shininess of the brass tube on the ends. At this point, we've got some excess wood on the ends, and we've also got some pretty sharp edges along the sides. So what I'm going to do is take these to a belt sander and just take off these sharp edges and any extra bits of wood on the ends. The next important step is to deburr the inside of those brass tubes. Whenever you do any trimming, you're inevitably going to end up with some burrs on the inside of those brass tubes. This is a chamfering tool. It removes those burrs, and it just makes it easier for the components of the pen kit to be able to slide in there a whole lot easier without damaging the components as you're sliding them in. So now it's going to be back to the lathe. We've got the mandrel set in the lathe. Now we're putting bushings into the ends of those brass tubes. The whole idea of those bushings is that it's going to allow us to know exactly what diameter we need to turn the wood down to so everything fits perfectly when the pen's assembled. This is the setup. Before we get started, it's always a good idea to make sure your tools are sharp, so that's what we'll be doing next, just sharpening up our tools. Next step is adjusting the height of the rest, and then we can get to work with turning the wood. For this project, we'll be spinning the wood at about 2,500 RPM. We'll be using three tools. The first one will be the spindle gouge, the next one will be the scraper, and the final one will be the skew chisel. The important thing here is to just take your time, go slowly, and ensure that the product that you end up with in the end is as perfect as you can get it. Once you've turned it to the appropriate diameter and shape, the next step is to sand it. For this project I use 120 grit, 400 grit, 600 grit and 1200 grit. For each one we sanded it while the lathe was turning, and then after each grit we then stopped the lathe and then sanded along the length of the grain just to minimize any scratch marks. Once this was done, I wiped down the pieces with a piece of damp cloth, and we can now start to get a sense of what this wood is about. We'll take the pieces off the mandrel now and remove the bushings, and the next step is going to be coating them with polyurethane. Each of the pieces was to receive 5 coats of polyurethane. Between each coat you need to let it set for around about 3 to 6 hours. Just to be sure that the polyurethane wouldn't drip to one side, I'd put it back into the lathe and turn it at around about 160 RPM, just for the first half an hour at least, until it's set sufficiently enough to know that it wasn't going to be dripping anymore. After 5 coats of polyurethane, we end up with pieces that have a fairly shiny glass finish. The next step is to just simply assemble the pen, and we can use the lathe to do that. Whenever you're assembling the pen, make sure that the components are going in straight and not diagonally, otherwise you'll probably end up damaging some of the pieces. This is the lid of the pen, and we'll now start working on the body of the pen. Once the components of the body of the pen have been assembled, we can now screw on the nib. And this is what the final product looks like. So we'll put some ink in it and take it out for a test run and see what it can do. Now the pen's been finalized, I can comfortably say that the components of the pen have been machined to fairly high tolerances, and the pen has come together really well. The pen also has an exceptionally smooth feel when writing also. I'm not sure how well the camera actually captures the patterning on the wood. This wood, when you move it around, the grain patterns seem to come in and out of focus, almost like an optical illusion. It really is quite stunning. Anyway, that brings us to the end. I hope you liked the video and hope to see you next time.